we start playing Scapma. So I'm looking forward to that.
Perfect.
So I'll stop sharing now,
Thank
and
you.
I think we are ready for the roundtable now, right?
Indeed, indeed.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, that handoff wasn't quite elegant, but I think that's my fault for not picking it up fast enough. So I'm super happy to be here today. I'm Joel Christensen from Brandeis University, where I'm a professor of classical studies and I'm serving as Senior Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs. I think the work being done by this group is critical for the future of our disciplinary interests. And not to put it too broadly, but also sort of humanistic presence in the public. But I don't want to speak too much. I want to be a little transparent about the fact that my relationship with this work is conflicted because I've never been outside the academy, at least not since I was in high school. So that's why I'm really happy to be able to support it as I can and hear some of the great ideas that the people in this roundtable have on how I can help support them, but also how we can build a community that's more supportive of the work that we do together and all of the different personalities and abilities that we bring to our work. So today that we have three people who are going to speak. I'm going to introduce them first, and then we'll have, after they speak, 3 rounds of questions, and I'll kind of push it so we can get to each of the topics ahead of time. And the basic questions are, how do we support independent scholars better? How do we foster integration between independent scholars and traditional academic structures? And how do we reach and engage more independent scholars to work with this organization? So our members who are talking about this today, to start, is David Danzig. David received his PhD from the Institute for the Study of the Ancient World of New York University, and he studies the social history of migration and immigrants in the first millennium BCE in the ancient Near East. He's also the creator and lead researcher of the Shenati Project, which is reconstructing the Babylonian chronology of the first millennium BCE to this day, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. David started Sasa 2.5 years ago to take proactive action on the issues that ancient studies is facing and to make a better ancient studies for all of us in the future. David will be followed by Austin Blackman. Austin graduated from Fuller Seminary, where he studied Hebrew Bible and Northwest Semitic languages. He currently works as a Hebrew Bible data specialist for Blue Letter Bible. He has written curriculum for numerous Bible courses for TL education and has an article being published in the upcoming volume of Textual History of the Bible. Austin has been working with Sasa for about a year as the independent scholar and alumni coordinator. And third, Heather Rosemarin is an attorney and independent scholar whose research interests, and I lost my script trying to let someone in, whose research interests include ancient Roman history. Based in California, Ms. Rosemarin is an active member of SASA's Independent Scholars Working Group, where she leads the initiative to compile resources for independent scholars in ancient studies. She holds an AB in Classics from Princeton University, a JD from the University of California, Berkeley School of Law, and travels frequently to the Mediterranean and has participated in archaeological excavations in Greece and Italy. So, David, do you want to get us started?
Sure. Thank you, Joel. Thanks so much for joining us today and leading this group. First thing, what I want to talk about today is about independent scholarship and the role I see that it needs to play in the future of ancient studies. But before I give the introduction to this session, my introduction, I'd like to take a moment to share my screen and show everybody something that we've been working on at Sasa for the last year, and that I'm hoping you'll like. So here is the title page and table of contents from the proceedings from Sasa's first virtual conference from last year, which we ran together with Digital Hammurabi, Megan Lewis, who's our co-editor. We have several wonderful co-editors who've been working on this project throughout the course of the year, and a bunch of our presenters from last year are publishing their work together in this volume. This volume is under contract with Archeo Press in one of their open access series, because we want to bring our independent scholarship to the public in a way that anybody can access it in any place, in any format that they have access to, rather than it sitting behind a paywall so people can't read this wonderful scholarship. And we're expecting that we will continue doing this year after year with the proceedings of this wonderful conference. And I just wanted to share that with all of you. If you want to download a version of this title page and table of contents, it's on the virtual conference webpage, saveancientstudies.org/virtual-conference. Right below the chat, there's a row of things that you can click on, and one of them is to download this table of contents so you can take a look at it yourself. All right, now let me go on. Sasa promotes and supports ancient studies engagement in informal contexts, in the public humanities, and in schools at all academic levels. We aim to grow the number of people involved in the academic pursuit of ancient studies scholarship and to expand the opportunities for this pursuit to everyone. So a natural consequence of this is that we will increase in the number of graduates who have their sights set on an academic career in the future. If jobs available in academia do not likewise increase, which we hope they will, but if they don't, this sets up a disaster of an overtrained, underemployed, or unemployed, indebted, and disillusioned cadre of people with doctorates and master's degrees, and many who opted out earlier along the course of their studies. So how could we possibly advocate in good faith to influence the lives of people towards such an awful predicament? It's even worse. The fact is that this isn't some hypothetical future. It already is the case. Many fully trained, well-regarded young ancient studies scholars cannot find employment in academia. There simply are not enough positions to accommodate the output of the current graduate programs. The situation has worsened to the degree that a negative feedback loop is operating. Dozens and dozens of suitable applicants pursue every single job opening. Search committees must act in good faith for their schools and their applicants, and therefore the demands upon job prospects are ever higher. This pushes young scholars to work even harder, to do even more, in order to reach the top of that list to get that job. But is this actually helping ancient studies? Do schools and departments benefit from this? Do students benefit? Does the scholarship benefit? And then there's the personal toll that's exacted upon so many. Graduate students and those holding doctorates regularly operate under enormous pressure. Anxiety and depression are common. Fulfillment in other areas of their lives is often delayed, if not dismissed. Women in particular face the tremendous dilemma of how to build a family while pursuing their scholarly passions. Many live in a precarious financial limbo as they attempt to keep their window of hireability open. Then there may come the soul-crushing day when a scholar decides to move in a different direction with their lives, with their careers, so often giving up on their passionate work to which they dedicated so many years of their life, usually over a decade. We believe that this crisis has to be addressed. The current situation of the mismatch between the number of qualified graduates and the number of available positions in ancient studies is absolutely untenable. It's time to come to terms with the notion that this simply will not change. No matter how many people become engaged in ancient studies, no matter how many students take Introduction to Greek or Archaeology 101 or World History 1, no matter how much publicity new discoveries garner, howsoever successful we will be with Sasa in growing ancient studies, there will not be commensurate growth in teaching and research positions. It's time to actually accept this and adapt. Our solution that we've been working on for over a year is to reimagine what it means to be a scholar. We need to separate the concept of scholar from academic. An ancient studies scholar is anyone who has achieved sufficient mastery over a set of materials so that they're able to engage in current scholarly discourse on that matter. An academic is someone who works at a teaching and research institution. A scholar has a lifelong passion. An academic has an occupation. Although there are many paths to becoming a scholar, all such paths must be supported and included within our community of ancient studies scholars. The purpose of this roundtable discussion is to continue our work on building toward a new acceptance of independent scholars and their integration into and normalization within the ancient studies community. In fact, this is one of the main goals of this whole conference, that by bringing together excellent scholarship of independent scholars, all of the presenters you've heard today, aside from our keynotes, are independent scholars, people will understand their value and belonging, the value and belongingness of independent scholars within the community of scholars. So let's work on solutions to the problems together that make independent scholarship difficult and that hold back the inclusion of independent scholars in the broader ancient studies community. So first, I'd like to turn things over to Austin Blackman and to Heather Rosemarin, who will present what we've been working on over the last year, since last year's virtual conference, in Sasa's Independent Scholars Working Group. And then we'll all return together and have a discussion of the many problems and working towards solutions for how to make this all possible.
Thank you, David. Yeah, like you said, these roundtables that we are going to have through this conference today and tomorrow came about from the conference last year and this creation of the Independent Scholars Working Group. So with that, I'm going to share a Google Doc that all the notes from this roundtable will be recorded on. So your guys' replies, things we discussed are going to be recorded, and you'll have access to view that. Use that as a resource, so that will be in the chat. But I'm going to report on the Sasa's Independent Scholar Working Group accomplishments since last year's conference, and it'll be followed by an open forum discussion to talk about topics related to the reimagining of ancient studies scholarship and community as a passion rather than a vocation. The field of ancient studies consists of a wonderful, tight-knit community of scholars. Though they're spread across the world, scholars see each other regularly at conferences and events held by various learned societies and departments. However, this community has strict boundaries, imposed by the limited number of academic positions available, as David discussed, and reinforced by the attitude that to be a scholar, one must be directly part of an academic institution. As you work to expand participation in the ancient studies field, this model of the self-defined of the community of scholars and the attendant attitude of exclusive must change. Sasa envisions a new ancient studies in which all are not only welcome, but also actively incorporated into the study of the deep past of all places and cultures. Any scholar of the ancient world should have a place in and be able to contribute to the ancient studies scholarly community. Together, we aim to pool our efforts and to make real change. So that's kind of our goal for these roundtables, goal for the entire community group that was developed out of last year. And since then, we've had two major projects that we've been working on. One is the Let's Get Published events that we host monthly, and then a resource page in a gathering of resources really that Heather has been leading and she'll report on. And then third is the conference as a whole and the roundtables that we will be having these next 2 days. So first, I want to say the Sasa Independent Scholar Working Group was created after last year's virtual conference and has met regularly over the past year. We meet each month and discuss life as independent scholars and opportunities to further the research of independent scholars. From these meetings, we began our two projects that are our monthly Let's Get Published events and then our resource project. So Let's Get Published event that was developed over the past year has hosted 6 events so far. These events, people submit their working projects to the events page, and then we assign them a day, and they are going to present their project. They have about 10 minutes, and they're going to present their project, talk about issues and things that they need assistance on, and then there is a community of scholars, independent scholars in that call that will give advice and give input and discuss their working project. So independent scholars and traditional scholars alike meet to present their working projects in the area in which they need advice. People who attend these meetings listen to the presenters, then engage in a discussion regarding their project and address the presenters' questions. We have presentations from a wide range of topics in ancient studies. And I want to share my screen to show you some of the presentations we've had so far. So if you can see this, here are a lot of the topics that we've explored. Wide range, and the people presenting are from very different backgrounds. Some are doing, like this here, their master's thesis, some are doing their doctoral work, others are trying to get a book published or an article done, or they have their own blog. So very wide range of goals for their projects, and a wide range of topics that we discuss as well. Oops. So that is probably one of our biggest events that has come out of last year's conference, and something that we're going to continue to do. We continually have people signing up. We've actually have less presenters each event because we want to have more time to talk about them. So as this grows, we're going to have more meetings and go from maybe once a month to twice a month, and have more people host these meetings, come to these meetings to discuss and be audience members. But in all, it is growing tremendously with people wanting to talk about their projects and get advice from a community of scholars. And then the second major project the Independent Scholar Working Group has been working on is the gathering of open source resources available for independent scholars. As most of us might know, resources can be difficult to get if we're not part of an institution, but Heather has done a great job showing that this is not the case. And there's actually a ton of resources out there for people who aren't part of institutions and need access to resources. So Heather's been leading this project, and I'm going to give it to her so she can give us an update on the project and its goals and areas in which we'd like it to grow.
Thanks so much, Austin, David, and Joel. And greetings to everybody from California. I'm Heather Rosemarin, and I've been involved in the Sasa group for about a year. And it's been a wonderful, warm, welcoming, and supportive community. And I encourage everyone to get involved. I think we should post some links in the chat, both to the Let's Get Published Fora and the working group in general, so folks can sign up if they are interested. I'm going to share my screen. I have a brief PowerPoint, and let me make sure that hopefully this works. Let's see. Apparently, my system preferences aren't set up for this. Austin, could you maybe pull up the PowerPoint?
Yes, give me a second. I will go get it. Okay,
thanks. So let me give a little bit of background on the origin of this project. In our discussions in the Independent Scholars Working Group, people have shared a lot of their concerns, the challenges they face as independent scholars. And among these are not having an institutional affiliation, not feeling perhaps comfortable going to professional conferences. Perhaps they don't know which publications are open to reviewing submissions from independent scholars. So in order to explore these topics, we set up a Google Sheet with 12 subject areas. And it looks like we're about to, great, thank you so much, Austin. So could you advance to the next slide? Great. So I already covered the background. As I said, after these issues were identified, we created a subgroup of volunteers to survey existing resources available to independent scholars with two goals: support independent scholarship in Asian studies and identify and address gaps in resources and other barriers to independent scholarship. And our process is really ongoing. As people find resources, they put them into the Google Sheet. I continually add to it as the months roll on. And the idea is that once we reach critical mass in these different topic areas, we'll publish them as kind of mini guides to independent scholars in this field, perhaps in the form of a blog, perhaps in the form of a PDF on the Sasa website. The actual form for sharing has not been determined yet. Austin, could you advance, please? I think it's useful for the discussion to review some definitions of what is an independent scholar or who is an independent scholar. So I think David has a really interesting definition, which is the last bullet point here. Anyone who has achieved sufficient mastery over a set of materials so that they are able to engage in current scholarly discourse on that matter. A National Coalition of Independent Scholars defines independent scholar as someone pursuing knowledge in or across any field who is not affiliated with an institution of higher learning in a tenure track position. So interestingly, that definition would include independent scholars who are perhaps adjuncts or postdocs or in some role that's not tenure track. Wikipedia defines independent scholar as anyone who conducts scholarly research outside universities and traditional academia. So that really draws more of a bright line between academia and independent scholarship. I kind of like the Canadian Academy of Independent Scholars definition: lifelong learners, avid readers and researchers, curious travelers, and thoughtful practitioners who are not affiliated with a university of scholar. And finally, the Independent Scholars Community on Humanities Commons defines an independent scholar as someone who produces research which can be published or presented at conferences outside of a tenure track teaching position in a university. So there's clearly some commonalities in these definitions, but also some distinctions. And of course, it's up to anybody, each of us to decide kind of which, how we see ourselves as independent scholars. But needless to say, there is, definitely a lot of flexibility and openness in these definitions. Austin, could you please advance? So in our gathering of resources, we've identified these categories: institutional affiliations, platforms, which would be sites such as academia, .edu, which serve multiple functions. They can be self-publishing platforms, they're social networking platforms, they're research sharing platforms, and we've identified 4 or 5 that we think are of interest. Memberships in learned societies and professional networks and history organizations. Interestingly, out of the dozens and dozens of ancient studies and history organizations that I have looked at and I've looked at their criteria, and they're all open to independent scholars. So this goes to what David was talking about earlier, that perhaps the barriers we imagine to independent scholarship are not quite as high as we initially thought. Because I haven't actually encountered to date a resource that says, nope, can't come in, can't do this, can't join, can't participate. So I think that's good news. So I think what we need to do is, encourage people to sally forth and present their research and submit their ideas and their publications and their presentations. And then we'll, see what happens. If there's a barrier encountered, we can try to address it. 4 is research. I mean, certainly access to libraries and tools like JSTOR are an issue that come up a lot, and we have some potential solutions for that. Where to publish comes up a lot, where to present comes up a lot, and I think Sasa has some great ideas about putting together a conference aggregator so we can keep better track of when the upcoming conferences are. That's 7, one of the conferences. 8, archaeological fieldwork opportunities. 9, continuing education for people who want to continue their study of ancient languages, for example. 10, of course, funding is a constant topic, except for, I guess, those who are retired or have another source of support, perhaps from a career they're pursuing. 11, inspiration, and 12, community. And below is a link to the Google Sheet. I don't know if it's active from the PowerPoint, but you can sort of see what we've gathered so far. And I'm going to just share one example. Austin, if you could advance. Institutional affiliation. So the problem that was identified was that outside of academia, ancient studies scholars often lack the benefits of institutional affiliation, such as the opportunity to post an online profile, a business card, letterhead, which they can use to perhaps write to a library or an archive. The ability to apply for grants, because oftentimes individuals are not eligible for grants, only organizations or institutions, and library access privileges. These are some of the barriers. So as a solution, several organizations offer independent scholars who meet their membership criteria an array of institutional benefits. And these are two that we have explored, National Coalition of Independent Scholars and Institute for Historical Study. Membership fees are in the order of $40 or $50 a year. They're not terribly high. And so I encourage anybody who's interested in institutional affiliation to explore these groups and see if they are interested in applying and accessing these benefits. Next slide. So if you're interested in these questions about institutional, about addressing barriers to independent scholarship and encouraging independent scholars to take advantage of the resources that are in fact out there, consider participating in our working group and our Let's Get Published fora, providing feedback on the resources category. There's 12 categories. Are they covering everything? Are there major areas that we're missing? Consider contributing ideas and links to the Google Sheet. Consider working with us to develop Sasa guides for publication. And I think, as we develop the conference aggregator, David, I think it would be great to have some folks involved in forwarding conference announcements and RFPs and so forth. This is the website for independent scholars that we're working with. And then finally, I posted here the Attic Red Figure Owl as a reminder of the importance of ancient wisdom, because that's what that means to me. So thank you so much for your time and attention.
Thank you, Heather, Austin, and David, for giving us all that information. And I also want to state that I think the way that you formulated it is really productive and helpful, starting with naming some of our challenges, but then being proactive and thinking about ways of reimagining the work that's done traditionally in the academy over the past, let's say, few centuries, but by no means intrinsically located there. So in that spirit, then, we've selected sort of 3 sets of questions to sort of push this a little farther. And I'd like to invite people to raise their hands digitally if they would like to contribute. And when you do, please introduce yourself. And if you're comfortable, turn on your video so we can, share your presence with each other. As a note, of course, we do have community standards, so please do abide by them and know that you'll get a fast hook if you don't. All right, but I doubt that's going to be the problem. For those of you who have access to the chat right here, I've put sort of the plan questions in there, or at least I'm trying to. And we'll just move through them as we can. And I've got a Zoom freezing issue. All right, so the first question that we're going to talk about is, what are the specific barriers that independent scholars face? And how can we support independent scholars better? So I'll lean a bit on the panelists who've already spoken, unless I get a hand to start with. But Heather, while we're waiting for people to absorb a little bit, in your experience, what have been some specific barriers you faced that you'd like to address more?
Well, I think the initial barriers that I personally faced were that I really had no community around me. So when you're in academia as either a student or an educator, you have this ready-made community of people who share your interests in ancient studies. And so whether it's at a seminar or, just over in the library or in a coffee meeting, you're able to bounce ideas off people. You're able to talk to people. You're able, to ask their advice. And so Sasa, I think, has really stepped up and filled that gap. There are other intentional communities of independent scholars, but as far as I know, Sasa is the only one that is really focused on independent scholars in the ancient studies field. So I feel like that was one barrier that is being successfully addressed thanks to the leadership of David and Austin and Sasa.
And I think that's a really good point to bring up, because even, academics who end up in small departments or in places that aren't focused on research are still around people who value the work they're doing and expect them to do it. So being separate from that and being somewhere else where it's not a common practice can be demotivating. Julie, I see your hand. You're muted, Julie.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I just wanted to add the lack of community and the surprising depth of lack of resources. I mean, you already mentioned the problem of the lack of libraries, but as someone in classics specifically, I found that I'm no longer even able to do my own searching because I'm used to the tools for searching for materials that the institutions always provide, L'Année philologique in particular, for those of you following along on that side. So, like, this is a really hard barrier to overcome, even when you do have community.
Yeah. And so that's, I mean, my bad solution to that is to pirate materials all the time, but that's not sustainable. And now that this is being broadcast, that was a joke. But one of our chat members, Max_KF, says that significant barriers how much of that scholarly publishing is behind a paywall. So if you're not part of an academic institution, this can change. And there are some fields where open access is much more common. The sciences that are government funded, you have to publish a lot in open access ways, and more in Europe and the UK, this is true. And sort of a backdoor way of solving this is just asking people to share publications with you. I certainly would do that all the time, but this puts an unfair burden on people outside the academy, right? And it really sort of disincentivizes working with their materials. So we've got a new person coming in. So the community is a problem, resources, access is to the problem. And one of the solutions you've already shown for both of these is sort of collective action, right? So as a group, has Sasa looked into sourcing some of these materials and providing access? Sorry, now I'm asking you questions. Heather, I see you raising your hand.
Well, first, let's make sure we all are aware of the access that's already available. Okay, so I think, I recommend everybody explore the access they can have as an alumni of their institution. So if you, for example, if you go to JSTOR, in addition to the 100 free articles a month you can search for, they have a list of all the universities that they have a relationship with. They have contracts with the alumni associations, not with the universities themselves, but as alumni, there are search privileges. So, and that's, they say on their website, that's a partial list, contact your alumni association. I don't know if that addresses L'Année philologique, but it's an example of kind of thinking almost like in an entrepreneurial way about how do I get access to these resources, and contacting the groups you have ongoing relationships with, such as your alma mater, or perhaps joining the different independent scholar organizations may have discounted subscriptions. Then there's just the, obviously everybody here is a research expert, so I don't want to presume that folks haven't already tried these things. I'm just putting it out there as that sometimes there are solutions. And thanks, Teresa, for that. No, many alumni groups are actually open to non-alumni. So like working your existing networks, or if you're in, and I know this is not true for everybody, but if you're near a major public university, exploring whether they have a program that offers members of the public access to the university collections. So, I have an alumni relationship with UC Berkeley, which gives me access to literally everything in their system. But they also have some programs that are open to the public as well. So that's, where I would start to explore before Sasa, of course, it would be interesting to, if we hit dead ends, if we hear from our community, I've tried all these things and I'm still hitting a dead end, and I think I and other scholars really, really, really need access to X, then maybe we try to explore a, like a concierge solution for Sasa folks.
And Heather, I want to raise up what you're saying in two counts. One, Many professional organizations give access to materials that you might be surprised about. So if you're part of the, CAMWest Classical Association of the Midwest and South, or SCS, you get like access to the Loeb Classical Library, or at least you used to. But also public institutions, state institutions are often part of networks. So I used to teach in Texas, and UT Austin's library was part of TechShare. So if you got a public library card at any library in Texas, you could go there and use the materials, or just walk in without the library card. You just couldn't take stuff out. And even some public institutions. I know in Massachusetts, people can walk into the Brandeis and Tufts libraries, but you don't have the login information for the electronic access. So one thing before sort of shifting our gaze towards the next set of questions I want to bring up is what collective action can do. So part of it, I think, is working with academics and non-academics to advocate more for open access publishing. This is something that I really, really want to focus on, because as we publish, we can choose to publish open access work. We can also choose to support it in other ways. It's not a silver bullet, but hopefully it can, mitigate some of the challenges. Of course, there are always going to be things like manuscripts that we're not going to have access to because it's not open access, but it is a start. So we have a couple more minutes for this prompt. Maybe one question left. If there's anybody else who has another thought about either what specific barriers independent scholars face, or some ways to support them. And I'll sort of do that thing like Dora the Explorer, where I blink and look at the screen. Okay. I think we can shift then over to this question number 2, which keeps us more or less on schedule, which is building on this first one, but how do we foster integration between independent scholars and academia? What are the ways that we can do it? And I'll just sort of put my own twist on there. Who's responsible for this, right? Where does sort of the burden fall? So how do we foster this integration and cooperation too? And maybe on this one, I'll start with you, David. David, do you have any thoughts about, fostering a collaboration between academic scholars and independent ones?
Well, I'm definitely the right person to pick on for this. I think it's an incredibly difficult problem, and that's really why we started with this conference, is to first of all, to show people out there and to show academics that independent scholars can do real scholarship. I think there's a misconception. I think there's a whole set of attitudes that are really the largest base of the problem, that people within academia, which means, from my perspective, is people who hold jobs and positions and students, collectively build up this attitude that people who are not within academia don't have the same level of quality in their scholarship or in their studies. And that's just patently false. Obviously, it's difficult to do high quality scholarship when you have other time commitments. But that's also true within academia. Everybody has other time commitments to many different things, that they don't spend all of their time, 60 hours a week or 40 hours a week, on their scholarly pursuits. That's just not true. They're teaching and they're doing lots of other administrative tasks along the way. So I'm not sure if that really went to the question, but I think beginning to understand that that not being within an academic framework does not impinge on the quality and level of scholarship is the first important step. And the thing that I struggle with is where the meeting points are going to be. Where are independent scholars going to be in physical or virtual spaces together with academic scholars? Where are they going to be able to mingle and talk to one another? Because that's how it's going to have to work for people to build an integrated community.
Thank you, David. And, not to add sort of flavor to it, even within academic standards, there are pecking orders, right? If your PhD comes from places, if your appointment is at a place, it can color the way people receive you. So Brian, I see your hand. Would you unmute and just sort of say hi?
Hi. So I'm the flip side of all that because and David and I go back very far because I am the complete independent scholar, if you will. I'm not involved in an institution. I have a profession completely outside of this. And I would really say that part of the answer is starting from scratch of even defining the term. What do you define by scholarship to people? You know, I'm a reader. I read a lot of different things in a lot of different areas. I bring them all together. I try to integrate them in some way. But it's not necessarily in the formal way. I mean, I finished a master's 20 years ago. So what does it look like to go through a career and want to get back into it many years later? What does it look like to have those conversations? Where are the forums? I mean, this is, you know, that's where Sasa came into play and and we have the technology today to really foster that. But we have to start by breaking down some of those jargons and terms and then rebuilding them, of course, as we're building the scholarship. Because there are many people out there who, not just dabblers, but really people who have spent a lot of time on a subject, who've gone really deep into something, but maybe don't have the tools to take it to their next step, or just haven't exercised those tools in so many years. And so when they want to come back into it, they feel like they really are at square one. They don't, you know, let's say you want to go back to school. How do you open that door when the people who were your mentors, professors, and so on are no longer there, or you have no relationship to them, and you're not the person you were when you were younger? How do you, where do you knock on the door? How do you deal with, you know, how life and the finances are? I think all these things play a role, but I think that starting number one in that term of, okay, what does it define you as a scholar, really is a fundamental beginning question to the whole thing.
And Brian, I'll just take a moment to sort of recap some of the great things you said before we go to Heather and Austin, because there are some themes there that I want to raise to the top, right? One is that technology has changed the access we have to scholarship, but it also changes our products, right? A conversation we're not having enough in the academy is, why do we still put so much focus in the humanities on a single authored monograph, right? Technology has changed the need for it. And just as you're saying, it's not necessarily the type of contribution that anybody can make or that anybody can use, right? As someone who has written books, has been a book review editor, I can say that I have mixed feelings about them. Another thing that you mentioned is again, the time and the community. So Julie brought up in the chat, the independent scholars don't necessarily have the time to focus on their work. And it may take longer to come out. It may come out in different form, Brian, as you're saying. But as someone who's traditionally in the academy, I can say that the passion and knowledge that you find on things like Reddit, even Twitter, right? It's pretty significant. I think it rivals Alexandrian Scholia easily, and often it gives me a run for my money. So I'm going to break the order, and I'm going to invite Babette to come in and join us because she hasn't spoken yet. And then Heather and Austin, I'll get back to you.
Thanks. I just have a kind of thought to add to this discussion that we've been having now on the relationship between the independent scholars and the academics. And it actually comes from a Sasa reading group that John Habersham and I just finished. We decided to maybe extend an invitation to some academics that we knew, with the hope that maybe they would just kind of join in. We were not asking them to present or do anything specific, just be part of the reading group and then share any knowledge they had. The reading groups are basically independent scholars who signed up for it. This worked very, very well as a means to actually make that connection, because I took a chance. You know, I'm just a volunteer in a number of organizations, and my Smithsonian research that I got involved in, I was introduced to several scholars. I said, okay, I'm going to instead of cold call, it was cold email all them. And I had very little hope that I would even get a response, let alone have them join me. I was surprised. I got a response from every single one of them. And we did have one of them join us. And I think the point being is that then that individual said he would be telling his students about Sasa and gives some more of the clues. So I think the point is, if we take our own involvements in a variety of organizations and then try to make those connections, to the academics, but from an independent perspective, all of a sudden you have this larger base to build from.
Thank you, Babette. And what I like about what you're suggesting is to echo sort of David's question, like, how do we create new community? How do we create new spaces? My worry there, as someone who's been invited to these groups and loves them, is when I go in, am I reifying relationships outside of that group, right? Is my academic identity preventing an honest exchange? Before I get to Heather, I want to bring up a comment from the chat, which is the suggestion by Ricardo Fernandez that independent scholars should publish their research in peer-reviewed journals. So for recognition, which is something that I think is a great suggestion. And I would invite people to look at some of the debates that are going on in the Chronicle and elsewhere about the infrastructure supporting peer-reviewed journals and how frayed it is right now. And I also do, one of the things that we didn't mention in the barriers to independent scholars that I am worried about is how in some journals, in some editorial boards, your affiliation will change the treatment you get in the process. And so this isn't supposed to happen, but it does. So I think really looking at the full range of publication possibilities helps. But, to sort of support Ricardo, it never hurts to send something out there and see what happens. Heather, I think your hand was up slightly before Austin's on this topic. Heather? You're muted. Do you want to chime in?
Yes, I
Okay.
do. If it's okay with Austin, I'll jump in.
Go
I just
ahead.
want to share a few reactions to the comments that have been brought up. So with respect to where can academics and independent scholars mix and mingle, build relationships and community, I think these professional associations, learned societies, they're open to everybody. And some of them are very inexpensive to join or even free. And we do have a list of dozens that I'm sure could be twice as long if we are expanding beyond my background in classics, Greco-Roman world, to all of the other ancient studies fields. So I'm just posting an example in the chat that the Association of Ancient Historians is $15 a year for membership. And their annual conference this year, which was hybrid, online, in person, was free. And Joel, I think academics such as yourself should come to independent scholar events. I think it's wonderful to have connection with the folks who are inside the academy. That's like cross-fertilization, and it's fantastic. So from my point of view, please, you're welcome. To the question of what is an independent scholar, that's why I put some definitions on my slides. I do think publication is core to scholarship because it is the way that we share what we've learned and our research and our conclusions and our theories. And but I want to point out that for the first time in human history, with a push of a button, you can publish to millions of people. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the platforms that we're compiling in our resource guide really include a lot of self-publication opportunities that can be, you can self-publish to academia.edu, just upload a PDF and boom, millions of people can access it. LinkedIn, Google Scholar, these are, you can publish an article, you can upload an article that has been published elsewhere, but you can also just upload a paper that you've written. Now, is this going to accrue the credibility of a publication in a peer-reviewed journal? Probably not, but it gets your ideas out there. They can stand on their own and people can respond, and that's instantly published to millions of people. So we have so many opportunities that even 50 years ago were non-existent. And I think we're going to have a session tomorrow about publications with World History Encyclopedia and others that offer more of a open independent scholars and offer peer review. So there's that that's another avenue. So I think there are a lot of publication opportunities that could be explored and leveraged. And then I finally just want to address the time to work, because I feel that strongly, because I'm an attorney practicing. I'm also a single mother. So the way I'm addressing this just from a personal point of view is just defining my goals very realistically. So, I consider it success if I am able to submit one 1,500 word article to World History Encyclopedia. Do I ever see myself putting out a critical edition? No. Okay. But that doesn't mean I'm not making a contribution to scholarship. And I'll just close with my favorite analogy, which is the brick road. The human knowledge is like a brick road. And some of us contribute many, many, many layers. And some of us just put one brick in, but we're all building the road.
And thank you for that metaphor, Heather. And one of the things I want to raise up on what you're saying is if you publish an idea, no matter how great it is, and no one has access to it, it can't become a fully integrated part of that road. So, I've spent a lot of time publishing, but also writing silly things on my blog. And you can guess which one has seen more eyes and has received more citations around the world. So, when I advise young scholars at my institution, I have to say, look, we have these rules people go through for tenure, right? But, what you get credit for in publishing is not at all commensurate with what's influential in the world anymore. So thank you, Heather. Austin. You're muted, friend.
All right. Yeah, I want to hit on that as well, that wanting to do PhD work for myself, and then also learning about the opportunities for independent scholars, I've realized that the barrier between those two is something I've more put up, especially with Heather showing all these resources that are still accessible for independent scholars. And then, like you said, with personal blogs versus academic publishing, it seems like there's even more freedom for independent scholars to get their work out there, because they don't have to worry about the institution they work at or going through editor boards or whatever they need to do to get that published. Where if you have your own blog, YouTube channel, Twitter, you can get your work out there by yourself, right away. So I'm realizing that the integration between the two and the boundaries that are put up there were something that I was putting up, and it's actually a lot more open. Like Babette was saying, reaching out to scholars, super intimidating, but their goal is to get their work out there. So someone reaching out about their work, I've always had great success reaching out to scholars for information or even things they publish that I don't have access to, because I think the independent scholar and the traditional scholar, their goals are the same: to do their research and to get it out to the people. So if we want to meet somewhere, that's where we meet. Our goals are very similar and the same. So to kind of plug the Let's Get Published event Sasa is doing, that's where the integration is happening. In that when we come together, people are presenting their topics. We have people presenting their PhD research. We have people, independent scholars, publishing, and everyone's talking about their research and the goals they want to meet. And there's no, are you an independent scholar? Are you a traditional scholar? That isn't part of the discussion, but the work is part of the discussion, and what we're doing and how do we support one another. So I think it's really just creating those communities, and then people are already ready to be part of them. They're all on Reddit and Twitter and YouTube, and they're all already in academic organizations looking for places to communicate their work. So like Let's Get Published and things Sasa are doing is just providing pretty much a Zoom call so people can talk about those. And so I think it's a lot easier than that I personally thought it was going to be, because it's just pretty much creating that space, and then everyone's going to be coming to it. So it's less of a boundary than I thought.
And to braid a few of these things together, that one of the sub prompt for this question was, are presentations at academic conferences a good way to foster integration? I think what you are saying is that, yes, going into traditional spaces is good, whether you're publishing or conferences, but also creating and capitalizing upon other spaces is important as well. And so one of the great things I think Sasa is doing is it's a interweaving or braiding these options together into one sort of plan. Julie.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on this thread of non-traditional publication, which for me as an independent scholar has kind of been the backbone of where I sit. I don't know if I'll ever be back in formal academia again, but I'm still within the community because of my presence, where if any of you knew me from before I joined Sasa, you probably knew me from my Twitter account at Brododactylos. And there's a great community of online scholars just on academic Twitter alone has been an amazing resource. But then you also have, like Austin was saying, like I have a YouTube channel. I have a 40-minute video on the lies that we teach about ancient Sparta. You know, we have ways to continue work to get work out to people that are not the traditional publishing avenues that are so heavily gatekept. And while I don't think that an article of mine would necessarily be considered for a traditional publication because I am an independent scholar without my PhD, I do have an article published by Alex Vanderwall on his blog about archaeogaming, right? So Sasa is a great focal point in bringing those kinds of resources together, and I would love to see more of traditional academia extending its hand to us. That's really what I want.
Thank you, Julie. And I want to say that your Twitter handle has always been one of my favorite. Brododactylos. It's deep. So no, and you bring up some great suggestions.
It's
there.
Aeolic.
Right. And one thing to bring in, I mean, the scholarship that some of you, most of you probably know, is related to this ancient Greek word skole, which means leisure, right? And it used to be conceived like something that a leisure class would engage in. And when we talk about traditional academia, one of the things that I want to emphasize is that these traditions aren't that old, especially when we're talking about ancient studies, which is 10 to 20 times older than the very traditions and conventions so many of us hold dear. So David, one more before we go to question 3.
Yeah, I just want to say that Sasa and I have been working on reaching out to the different academic professional organizations. And one thing that I've worked on together with the executive directors of the Society for Biblical Literature and the executive director of the Society for Classical Studies is starting to create a coalition. We call it the Coalition of Asian Studies Organizations, because there are people out there like you, Joel, who recognize that there does need to be change and there does need to be more integration. And by bringing together these organizations over time and developing the communication between them and collaboration, I think we are going to be able to start moving them towards accepting and being more open to independent scholars and starting to work towards integrating them. So I just wanted to say that this is, I think a lot of what people have been saying is that we should be working from the independent scholarship side towards the academic side, but I totally think that we have to work from both sides towards the center. And I think there is a recognition among many academics that this is the appropriate time to start doing that. It's just it's a enormous shift in cultural mores, ways that people are used to doing things. And that's going to take a long time to shift. But part of how that actually does happen is that as students grow and become scholars and potentially become academics, they who are exposed to this type of thinking, they are the ones who are going to be carrying that forward into the future and making a more integrated scholarly community. Thanks.
Thank you, David. I think when we're living with things we were raised with, we forget how quickly things can change. And so when it comes to our professional organizations, are they cartels? Are they guardians of knowledge? Or should they be engaging in advocacy and outreach? And those of you who've been involved with professional organizations over the past two decades can recognize those different themes in their various behaviors as they struggle to figure out who they are. So question 3, before we move towards some call to actions, if we have them, is how do we reach and engage more independent scholars to connect with Sasa? David has really mentioned some sort of higher level work there, structural work, engaging with the professional organizations. But what are ideas we have for bringing more people into the collective? Because from my perspective, at least, the more people involved, the more human resources we'll have, the more ideas we'll have, and the further the reach of this organization will go. So I just said too much, right? But what are some ideas for reaching out and sort of expanding the size of this tent? And I think this time I'll pick on Austin. Austin, do you want to get us started out with some ideas?
Yeah, that's good. I think like Julie was mentioning all her YouTube channels, her Twitter accounts. I would say, I mean, Sasa in general, reach out to people already doing the work, having those YouTube channels, and we have Port Agent, we have partners with those type of people doing those. But I think for independent scholars, organization like Sasa coming to independent scholars saying, we are interested in what you're doing, because independent scholars already feel probably like they're doing the work for themselves or by themselves. So having some sort of organization coming to them and asking them to be part of what we're doing would be something that independent scholars would probably appreciate and like. So again, to plug the Let's Get Published events, a time for independent scholars to present their work to a community and talk about their work would be able to connect more with Sasa.
All right. Thank you. If you guys have specific things you've seen or opportunities to engage that have been missed, what are some of those? So David, I see your hand.
I wonder if there might be a way to engage ancient studies departments, because from my point of view, they're the people who hold the keys to their alumni who are no longer within a scholarly community. And I don't know what would be an effective way of getting them interested in trying to reach out to their alumni towards connecting with us.
That's a good suggestion. I think one of them, so from my perspective as a former department chair, we're given very few resources from our institutions and asked to do too much. So I think there just may be exhaustion there. But I think that's a great place to start, David. Julie, what are your ideas?
So I think in terms of getting departments involved, the easiest thing to do is to email department administrators. Don't reach out to the professors. They're busy and they're not going to look. But the admins, if you send them an email, it says, hey, please forward this to all of your undergrads or all of your alums. That's a really easy way to, as long as it's, proper and official looking and sends them to Sasa, I think that's a really good way to get the word out there. You might not get anybody right away, but when that senior graduates and goes off to do something completely else, they're going to think, oh, well, wasn't there that email that I got about how I can stay connected? I think that's really one of the biggest areas where I see loss is people who, well, they love the work, but they just did that for undergrad, right? So, so tell them before they leave. That's my thought.
I like that a lot. And what I'm hearing here is that there are really two sort of groups to think about. One is sort of people who are passionate about a subject and maybe go to graduate school or maybe don't, but don't get engaged in the idea that they can keep working on the ancient world after their degrees. And then we also have, Julie, and I'm going to direct this to you, I'm going to get you more involved, are scholars who are working and publishing, but are not in academic positions already. They don't need to be convinced that they can do it. They just need to be brought into the fold. So Julie, while I'm waiting for other hands, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about sort of the ills and advantages of social media for bringing independent scholars together.
Oh gosh. So social media is so complicated and it's so new that we just don't have good work done on how to use it safely. I guess I'll call it. So one of the things that I mentioned that I love is Classics Twitter has basically been my lifesaver. Because when I left academia, it was not under friendly circumstances, and I don't know where I would have ended up in terms of my work. But with knowing the people from Classics Twitter, I've been invited to speak at conferences. I've been pulled into Sasa, which I never would have heard of without Classics Twitter. I have been able to go on podcasts and talk about my research. This is a really good place where I enjoy being a classicist, being an ancient historian, being able to say, hey, it's okay to just stay here, to keep up with this. You don't have to, be all one thing or all the other. And that's a really great way also to reach undergraduate students or even high school students who are terminally online, as most of us younger folks tend to be. I say us younger folks, that they're infants compared to me. But, when people are so very involved with Twitter and they can seek out academic spaces on Twitter by finding a hashtag Classics Twitter, hashtag ancient history, whatever it is, they can start to see a world that they can picture themselves in doing. And I think it's the same with YouTube. We also get, and with TikTok, Maxwell T. Pauley has an amazing classics TikTok that I've had friends who aren't classicists, who aren't ancient historians, who have nothing to do with this, say, hey, I saw this Latin teacher on TikTok. And I'm like, yeah, I know that guy. So I think that's a really wonderful thing, that we can be so easily accessible, that we can reach people who don't even necessarily think of themselves as even independent scholars, just interested.
And, to bring up another, like somebody already mentioned earlier, Liv Alberts, let's talk about myths, baby. She's great to talk to. She's really built this podcast and its following. And there are several scholars like that who exist across different platforms on social media online. And notice, I don't know if Liv would be comfortable with me saying a scholar, but I think that's
I agree with you. And I've actually had that conversation with her.
She
doesn't think of herself as a scholar because she's just interested. She's just asking other people about it.
Yeah, she does research. She summarizes it. She repackages it for new forms. That's the type of scholarship, as far as I'm concerned. But I wanted to use that. So, Julie, your experience and your wonderful Twitter handle as an opportunity to sort of answer one of the questions here for you, or at least give a direction, which is that people have found these new spaces and allowed them and poured their passions into it. Right? It's Twitter, it's YouTube, it's the people on Reddit who know more than I ever thought anybody did. Right? We have John Zetzi's there on Reddit practically. And these are opportunities, these are people already not taking no for an answer and just making the spaces for them. And I, as a traditional scholar, have entered these spaces, and I usually don't even know what people's affiliations are. And people I want to mention Peter Gainsford. I'm forgetting his Twitter sign now, but I asked him to write a chapter for a book on the Odyssey, because his work is excellent, and I don't care what his affiliation is. So I think part of it is also breaking down the boundaries in both ways, and opening spaces for each other, because we all know the faculty members who think we shouldn't be doing Twitter, but we should be out there. We should be getting our feet a little bit wet. All right. So we are, Kiwi Hellenist. Thank you. He's excellent. And there are so many people like that. I mean, part of my practice is to not check credentials because I just don't care. But that's something, I think that's part of the aesthetic we can work on. So we've got a few more minutes to talk about our takeaways, our calls to action. But Julie, I interrupted you, I think, and you raised your hand.
I wanted to get to the pitfall side, which I'll keep short.
Oh yeah, sorry.
So the big pitfall, I think, came very clear to a lot of people when that TikTok got viral for spreading the conspiracy theory that Rome didn't exist.
Yeah.
right? This was everywhere for a couple of weeks, which as it turns out is part of an even bigger ahistorical conspiracy. But like, it is just as easy for people to access bad information as it is for them to access good. And that is really one of the dangers of the non-vetted space of social media. And so that is one of those problems that is much easier to deal with from the academic side, because you can sort who knows what they're talking about from who doesn't. But it's very dangerous for the average independent person who might not necessarily know the difference between me talking about something and the person who thinks that Rome never existed.
And thank you for that, Julie. And I would add sort of to the perils, the mobbing, abuse, bullying, the things that can happen. But again, smart people who are passionate can help counterbalance all of those things. So to raise up from the chat, Michael DeGator says that Dr. Miano, I think, from World of Antiquity on YouTube is breaking boundaries. So I don't know this site. I'll look on that. I'll look at that. But in our brief time yet, and I said I'd stick to the clock, but we might go a little over. What are some specific things that we can do going forward from this conversation, or that occurred to you during the conversation, that we can recap next year when we meet again? So calls to action, specific things you'd like to do or have someone else look into doing. Anything's game. And let me start with our panelists again while we all think about it. Oh, Teresa, I see your hand. Would you like to make a suggestion? And then we'll hit up Austin.
Well, this would be a very out of left field idea, but a tattoo committee. There's tremendous interest, especially on Reddit, on Latin and Greek tattoos, and often they are they can really use guidance and expertise. So if we had a vetted committee that can provide feedback and guidance, that might engage a greater public. That's my idea.
Thank you. I actually don't mind that one. A few years back, probably 5 or 6 years now, 6 years now, Eidolon did an issue about tattoos, classically informed tattoos. And I can't tell you how many times I've been contacted randomly by members of the public as an expert to give advice on tattoos. So that's a great one. Austin, what do you have?
So I'd say, luckily, you don't have to wait till next year to continue this conversation. We have our monthly meetings, our working group on independent scholar community building team. So I put it in the chat. You could sign up for a meeting for the end of this month or at the last Sunday of the month. And just like that, the tattoo committee, those are the types of things we want to talk about, and how can we start doing these projects to expand independent scholars. So you could join those meetings, and that's really when the work takes place, and brainstorm what we need to do as independent scholars to move forward. With the Reddit, and we talk about Reddit, Twitter, YouTube, I'm interested in if we would have independent scholars be on those places, part of Sasa, to be vetters and provide information as like a team-based thing. So we have independent scholars from Sasa that are in those spaces, and we kind of report on those weekly. What's going on? What are we talking about? What are we engaging with? So if we have, instead of just ourselves on there working, if it's like a team-based collaboration.
Thank you, Austin. And I'm sorry, I didn't know the schedule. This is Layla. She managed to take a nap for most of this panel, so I'm going to congratulate her for that. Heather, I see your hand.
Hi, everyone.